The main thing I'm trying to do is get nonprofits not to do something that's stupid and or unethical. And I mean, one of the examples I have in the book is the National Eating Disorders Association in the US. Eating disorders went way up during the pandemic. Their team was really stressed. They were starting to talk about unionizing. And the board fired all of the human counselors that took calls from people with weight disorders and replaced them with Tessa, the AI chatbot for weight disorders. And 3 days later, some survivor was like testing this out to see how it was and got screenshots of Tessa telling you to count calories. Now, if you know anything about weight disorders, that's the last thing you should tell someone who has an eating disorder.
Good evening. My name is Susan Spurlock. I'm Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University, and I'd like to welcome you to our program. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome Jim Fruchterman, a leading social entrepreneur, MacArthur Fellow, a recipient of the Skoll Award, an award for social innovation given to individuals or organizations creating solutions to the world's most pressing problems, and a distinguished alumnus of Caltech. His life's work is applying technology to benefit the 90% of humanity typically neglected by for-profit tech companies by building the tech and data for good movements and launching nonprofit open source software enterprises. His new book, Technology for Good: How Nonprofit Leaders Are Using Software and Data to Solve Our Most Pressing Social Problems, arrives at a moment when the public conversation about tech often focuses on risk, disruption, and inequity. Jim asks us to widen the frame, to look at where innovation can expand opportunity, strengthen communities, and shift power towards those too often left out of the digital revolution. In many ways, this evening's conversation sits squarely within the mission of Ford Hall Forum, bringing forward ideas that challenge convention, illuminate complexity, and critically serve the public interest. Jim's work, from accessible technologies for people with disabilities to data tools for frontline nonprofits, shows what can happen when technical brilliance meets moral imagination. In 2018, Jim founded Tech Matters as a tech for good nonprofit. Tech Matters builds technology for social good movement, helping social change leaders who use tech to achieve impact at scale. Jim is currently CEO and founder of Benetech, a pioneering nonprofit technology company to empower people with disabilities to read independently. Guiding this evening's conversation is someone who has chronicled the tech world with wit, rigor, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Hiawatha Bray, a long-time award-winning technology reporter at the Boston Globe, which he joined in 1995. Bray has helped the region and the nation make sense of the fast-moving currents of innovation. Bray has frequently appeared on local television and radio programs, most recently on the WBUR news show Radio Boston. Bray has authored 2 books, You Are Here, A History of Modern Navigation Technologies, including inertia navigation, GPS, and satellite imaging systems, and a conspiracy thriller novel, Power in the Blood. And we're delighted to have him lead tonight's conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jim to the podium, who will give some brief remarks, and then we'll join Hiawatha in a moderated conversation. Jim.
Hi, thank you. So I want to take you back to a boardroom in Silicon Valley. And seated around the table are a bunch of venture capitalists, each who've invested at least $1 million in my startup AI company. And we had built what was then at the leading edge of AI, which was making a machine that could read any kind of text. And so the goal of our product was to replace people typing things in, people doing data entry from insurance forms or contracts for lawyers or whatever it might be. But today we're demonstrating a new product. So I'm the VP of marketing for reasons I can't actually explain. And we take a piece of paper and we put it through the scanner. And it scans it, takes a picture of the page. And then the secret sauce in our technology was to translate that picture into a word processor file of all the words on the page. And so scanned it. We had, multiple circuit boards and custom chips. We took the word processor file of the page and we sent it over to a PC, and a first generation voice synthesizer read the words aloud. These are the times that Tryman solves. But it wasn't quite that natural sounding. And the board was excited because the demo had worked. And they said, Jim, what's the market size for reading machines for the blind? And I said, well, our best estimate is about $1 million per year. And a very awkward silence ensued. And then finally, one of my investors piped up and said, and what's the connection to the $25 million that we've invested in your company? And I said, oh, it's the coolest application of our technology. It's going to be great public relations. Our employees are going to be so excited that we're doing this good thing, and our customers will be proud of us. And my venture capitalist vetoed the product in the very same meeting for excellent business reasons. Because to raise that kind of money in Silicon Valley, we weren't promising them $1 million market. We were promising them hundreds of millions of dollars that were going to justify the amount of capital that they invested. So they vetoed it for good business reasons, but terrible social reasons. And that question about what is the connection of this technology to this social impact issue has been something I've been working on ever since. Now, I came out of that board meeting kind of dejected. But then I got a call from my lawyer. I had a very good lawyer who's helped me solve problems. And he knew that I was pitching the board on the Reading Machine for the Blind project. And he said, so how'd it go? I said, well, they vetoed it. And he said, well, maybe there's another way. How about I do some pro bono work and help you start a deliberately nonprofit tech company? And I kind of giggled because my tech company was, supposed to be a for-profit, but it was a nonprofit at that time. And so I thought, wow, you could be like successful by definition if you're a nonprofit tech company. And so I went ahead and he did the pro bono work. We started a charity. I told my wife I would do it for 1 year and hire an executive director and go back to Silicon Valley. And that was more than 30 years ago. It turned out that it worked. And within 3 years, we were a $5 million, slightly profitable business operating inside a charity of selling reading machines to blind people. And it's the only startup I ever was associated with that beat business plan, but partly because our expectations are set so low. So the real issue here is market failure, that there's a huge gap between what is possible with technology that's already been invented and what's sufficiently profitable to get the attention of venture capitalists or a successful public company. So this market failure gap shows up in a lot of different ways. One way it shows up is that if you go to a nonprofit, it's like going into a time machine that goes back into the past when it comes to technology. The only question is, are they 5, 10, 15, or more years behind? And it's not because they're not smart people, it's that they don't have a lot of money. Donors aren't particularly into funding technology. They would rather fund more basic needs like blankets and food and housing, even if you could do something much more cost effectively. And the for-profit world doesn't build the solutions for the specific problems that different parts of the nonprofit sector face. And so kids in Zambia, people with disabilities, not that interesting a market. So what we can do is we can think about how does technology actually make this impact. Now, when I started back in the day, for 10 years, I thought I was the only crazy guy in Silicon Valley not trying to become rich. But over the last, especially 10 or 20 years, I've met now probably well over 1,000 nonprofits that have a tech team that are focusing on solving a problem for social good and making a giant impact. And often they're doing things that maybe are twice as effective as the status quo, or 10 times, or even 50 times more effective. Because a lot of the things that go on in the nonprofit sector involve information technology, and IT is pretty good at making that more efficient. And so I thought, gee, not a lot of people know that there's all this cool stuff going on for technology in social impact. And so I decided to write the first book on how to not get rich starting a tech company. There are thousands of books on how to make money starting a tech company. We should have at least one. And so a lot of the content of the book is telling the stories of these tech for good nonprofits because they're not well known and yet they're doing amazing things. And so it's the book, I do a podcast, I've done research, wherever I can, I talk up these people because each of their stories has something to teach people who want to follow in their footsteps. Because that's what the book is designed to do, is to say, hey, look, there's all this great stuff that we learned in the tech industry that we can adapt, things like human-centered design, taking advantage of the cloud, using AI. These are all things that can be effectively used in the nonprofit sector. We need to step away from some of the things that Silicon Valley does that maybe isn't always in the interest of certain populations, like maybe not great for the mental health of young people, or social media being an example of this. And so how to take that balance and also say what's different about the nonprofit sector. How is it different to raise money from donors and corporations as donors as opposed to from venture capitalists? What's different about that? How do you recruit people? How do you do intellectual property? Probably want to do open source because you're not making money on license fees. And so my goal is to try to illustrate through these stories, through this book, is sort of a guidebook for how you might want to start your own tech for good nonprofit, how a nonprofit that is looking at how to do more with less, seems like technology is one of the few ways I know to do more with less, is how do we actually apply that and build a tech team inside your nonprofit that's actually going to be successful and making that kind of difference. And my goal is to encourage more people to move from money to meaning. And instead of, trying to build a great product and maybe doing evil by accident, and then when finding evil pays really well, doubling down on evil, how do we actually mindfully go in there and say, as a nonprofit, a $1 or a $5 million a year break-even venture is a giant success in the nonprofit sector. And by moving the goalposts that far over, I think we can see how we can bring technology that's already been invented to benefit all of humanity, not just the richest 10%. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to pivoting to chatting with Hiawatha.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thanks much. That was fun. And oh, wait, sorry.
Yeah.
There you go. That was fun. And sure enough, your book is full of fascinating insights about all this. But, you talk early on about something that immediately comes to mind when you think about this, which is this idea that technology is almost magical, and that if we could only find the right technology, some organization that wants to achieve some wonderful goal could somehow multiply its effectiveness a million times over. We just need the right tech to do it. And I get the impression from your book that that's not probably the right way to go about this whole thing, is it?
Well, I think Silicon Valley learned that tech first doesn't always work. And we see that every fad, right? People try to apply the blockchain was going to solve every single one of our problems, and it didn't exactly do that. So I think that what Silicon Valley has focused on is user-centered design, lean, agile, these buzzwords, where it's like, well, you have to have a theory that our product's going to add value, and you try it out on the users, and if they say, bleh, you pivot, you start over. But my sort of point was, don't run around, say, with a blockchain hammer looking for nails. Listen to the community, find out where their pain points are, and build a solution that relieves their pain. It's the old venture capital cliche, we would rather invest in painkillers than in vitamins.
Yeah, I know that's a great line too. But I mean, one of the things that occurred to me, because I think about it sometimes at my church, for example, is you look at this and you go, I don't know whether a given sort of technology is something that would even do me any good. You sit there wondering, okay, all this wonderful AI stuff that's coming on, what would I use that for in my organization? I'm not even sure I know. How does the organization begin by figuring out whether or not they do need a technology tool that can dramatically improve their impact? Do we just assume that there's some magic thing out there, or do we have to already have an idea of what we're trying to do and how technology would help?
I think the average organization, that's not their job, right? They've got kids to serve, people to train how to do a certain kind of job, whatever their nonprofit mission is. Right. And so I think that they should be talking to their peers and finding out, have some of their peers found a great piece of technology? Because my number one recommendation is wait until there's a product, right? Because, I don't know, restaurants and golf courses shouldn't be writing their own software. The average nonprofit shouldn't be either. And so a lot of the goal of the book is to get people to create more of those products for the nonprofit sector. And in sometimes quite a number of companies will try to help you understand how to use their technology. A lot of them do pro bono work on the side. And so, but I tell people to mainly talk to their peers and maybe get a board member who's tech, who can actually say, there's a productivity tool that can solve this problem that we're wasting all our energy on.
But you first got to identify the problem.
Absolutely.
And then you've got to decide whether or not it is a problem that is susceptible to a technology solution, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But so much of what the nonprofit sector does is actually moving information around. And often they do it in a way that is kind of old-fashioned. I mean, for example, we made reading machines for the blind so they could scan their own books. The status quo was blind people were read to, or you got a book on tape through the mail. And so we basically introduced ebooks, and then we created an online library of ebooks, now has 1 million books. And we really do deliver a book to a disabled person for 1/50th the cost of sending audio cassette tapes through the mail. And, our Library of Congress was still shipping audio cassette tapes through the mail 10 years ago, and cassette tapes had been obsolete for, 15 or 20 years, and they were still doing it. So that dynamic of not adopting the latest tech innovation, even if it solves your problem better, is quite common in the nonprofit sector.
Well, it's weird because the very example that drew you into this industry is so fascinating because now this is almost universally used by people with no disabilities at all. Absolutely. Not a week goes by when I am not listening to an audiobook. And in fact, public libraries, I don't know how many of you guys use Hoopla or Libby? Yeah, you could just check out books on your phone from the public library. That was invented for helping people with disabilities, right?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, one of our team took over the commercial ebook standard and inserted the digital standard for the blind as EPUB, which is the standard that everyone publishes their books in. Then some of them make a proprietary version, but that's the lingua franca of ebooks. But yeah, there was so much of AI was pioneered for people with disabilities. I mean, voice synthesis was developed for fighter pilots and people with disabilities. And now we talk to our phones every day.
A lot of the work that Ray Kurzweil did,
absolutely,
which is a lot like the stuff that you were working on grows out of that. And now every computer is stuffed with, they call it accessibility features, which I guess were originally invented for people with disabilities, but now practically everybody uses them at least occasionally.
Well, if you're sort of in my age range, you might just make the text 50% larger. Yeah. You just might.
Well, exactly. Or you make the mouse arrow larger.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can find other examples of? Does using technology for these nonprofit social good applications end up migrating into the larger market? That's one area, but can you think of others?
All the examples I have are out of accessibility, but that partly because I've been in the accessibility field for 40 years. So that's probably no surprise. I think that a lot of the other innovations I see adopted in the nonprofit sector are probably got pioneered in the business sector, maybe got pioneered in the military, and then got adopted to the social good application. But I think accessibility was one of those sort of rare examples where people with disabilities really needed the technology and they might spend thousands of dollars. I mean, Ray's reading machine started at, I don't know, 50 grand or something. So it took, but the great thing about technology is it just gets cheaper and cheaper. So
I don't know if you remember the Stevie Wonder commercials where he's sitting in front of the huge machine that the Kurzweil developed.
Yeah, it was a tech maniac.
Absolutely.
Still
But-
is.
So, when dealing with these nonprofit organizations, do you find like there's a group that knows what they want and don't know how to build it, as opposed to other groups that could benefit immensely from technology but don't even know that they could? How do you decide between those two?
Well, I've probably pivoted more towards having the nonprofit sector come to me and come to technologists like me with a problem. Because when I thought of what I thought they should need, sometimes I was right and sometimes I was wrong. But when they show up and say, we have this desperate problem, we need you to do something. And that's where we're kind of my most recent tech social enterprises are coming from. I think a lot of other people are, one of the areas of innovation is kind of someone works in a traditional nonprofit and gets very frustrated with the pace, and they have some level of tech skills. They don't have to actually be a techie, but they're younger, they're more tech savvy, and they decide, I'm going to invent something that's a lot better than the way we're doing it. And so I think a lot of the social innovation that goes on is from someone who knows something about the problem. More than half the time, it's someone who's lived that problem, right? Who's got a proximate issue and can actually identify with it, but has that extra ability to imagine how it could be better. And that's not your average nonprofit.
Yeah, I didn't memorize your book, unfortunately. There's a great example you give of some nonprofit that they developed an application and it turned out to be a complete flop because nobody used it. What was that one you were talking about?
That's a lot of them, actually.
But it was a fascinating story because I immediately got what they were talking about. You create this technology and it might help, but the end users simply don't use it. And in some cases, I think it was an app that ordinary people would use that could provide some kind of assistance, and they didn't even know the app existed, so they never downloaded it.
Yep. I mean, I think one of the examples, I think the one you're talking about is actually from the human rights area, which is, we'd had examples of videos taken of human rights abuses going on,
Right.
and then circulating, and then a whole bunch of people, including, the ACLU, built a witnessing app, and it's much better for witnessing civil rights violations than your standard phone, but no one downloads it, no one uses it. And so when people are witnessing something, they pull out their regular phone and they use their regular camera app. And so it turns out that you don't need a witnessing camera app because that's just not the way the real world works. Or another one was the panic button.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this gets reinvented every few years. The idea is that, I'm a human rights activist, and right before I get abducted by the evil oligarchs and their police force or something, I'm going to send an alert on my phone. And Amnesty actually, to their credit, tried to build this for 4 or 5 years and then wrote up all the reasons why it was never going to work. But unless they'd actually tried, they wouldn't have learned it. And that is one of the key things is, most tech inventions don't make it. And that's normal, that's okay. But hopefully you figure out it's not going to make it after you've spent $5,000 worth of your time and not $500,000 worth of donor money.
No, the $500,000 worth of donor money raises an issue that I was wondering about too. I'm reading the book and it's like, this all looks like it's for people who are running large nonprofits that can scrape up tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to build the various things you're talking about. I guess I'm used to thinking of, somebody who's running a food pantry or something, and some relatively small charity or some kind of child care service or something. How do small nonprofits take advantage of this kind of thing? They can't afford to build an app.
Well, I think that's why you need people to actually build products, right? And there's quite a number of people building products for audiences where the economic justification isn't there to build it. But so for example, we're writing software that's like software to run a contact center for 911 for kids.
Right.
Right. Our typical partner in the developing world has a budget of $250,000, maybe. And can they really afford to pay for this? No. Can they afford to build it? No. Could we raise a few $1 million from donors and build it and get it to them for less than it costs to deliver the service? Yeah, we can, because we're a charity. And our Rich World helplines, we're cheaper than Salesforce and better for their application, so they pay us. So this kind of dynamic is happening across the social sector of people building a product for that small group. For example, we write software for human rights activists. right? That was a documentation app for human rights defenders who are out there interviewing witnesses about human rights violations and all that. None of them could afford to pay us for that. But we built a product that got used in, I don't know, 50 plus countries to document human rights abuses. And it was, compared to what it would cost, like all of them trying to build this on their own, having us build it once and make it global, that's the story of tech. That's the leverage of tech. But you don't do custom software for a single organization with a budget of $500,000, though it gets tried a lot.
Mm-hmm. No, so what you're really talking about is, and I don't know is if this is the way you do it, almost creating a library of this kind of application. You raise enough money to build these kinds of apps that where there is a proven need for it, even in perhaps one small organization, and then you announce to the whole nonprofit community, hey, you guys, we built this. Why don't you use it too?
Yeah.
And I take it that's how you try to go about this.
And a lot of the examples from the book are examples like that. I mean, for example, a couple of public health professors from Harvard built an app for doing surveys when you don't have the internet. And turns out, it's kind of like SurveyMonkey, but for the real world. And it's about $1 million, $2 million a year nonprofit. And people collect millions of surveys a year using their app. And it's got a kind of a free to your average nonprofit, but if you're the UN, you should pay something because you're using it a lot more. So it's got a sliding scale thing. It's a great application. And you can do something that helps everybody in the world do any survey that you would do, and starting in healthcare, but in every other part of the nonprofit sector, and it's essentially free to any small nonprofit.
So how do you let nonprofits that might benefit from this stuff know that it already exists and they can come in?
That's the biggest challenge. Actually, it's not actually creating the technology, it's distribution, it's getting to scale when you don't have marketing dollars. And one of the things that we do is like, well, what would guerrilla marketing look like in this area? So, for example, in the disability field, we couldn't afford to go call on every blind person. So we would go to every state or national conference where blind people would show up and show our product. And then we would rely on word of mouth to get the word around.
I would assume that one would be easy because I've written about disability issues. And it seems to me like most people in the disability universe are always already out there looking. They're very tech savvy. They know this stuff is out there, don't they?
Yeah, but not when you start. I mean, you have to it took us, 5 years to become the norm, the replacement for Ray Kurzweil's reading machine, because every blind person knew about Ray's reading machine, couldn't afford it. And we brought out something that was, I thought, better, but much cheaper, under $5,000. And suddenly it took off and we sold a whole bunch of them. And then finally, like the VA, which is the biggest buyer of reading machines, they didn't want to deal with us. They're like, go away. But eventually enough vets started saying, we want this thing. The VA ended up becoming my big customer. But it's, you have to figure out, like, what is the leveraged way? Email marketing. We would send emails to special ed teachers, and we would get open rates of 25%, which is unheard of in email marketing. But let's just say it's a very targeted ask. We have a free service for you that's going to save you time helping your disabled kids. They might open that up. It doesn't look like your standard piece of spam.
Yeah, no, but I don't find that surprising at all. That's just what I mean. That's an audience that's primed already. They're looking for that kind of thing. And I wonder how you find other people in, for example, human rights organizations or women's rights organizations who may not even know they need this. And you're saying, hey, we've got this tool. You should come and try and use it.
I mean, human rights is a tough area to market in because people have a lot of distrust, especially distrust of technology. And so the way that we made our inroads there was Human Rights Watch and Amnesty told people, these are good guys, they're trustworthy, you should talk to them about what you actually want. And that gave us the access to the real users so we could actually figure out what they needed, build those prototypes, show them the prototypes, and when they said, I want that, then we built it. But so much of this, the nonprofit sector needs to run on money, but I think it really runs more on trust. And sometimes, tech companies are very trustworthy and have a great partnership with a certain field, and sometimes less so, and that's why a nonprofit tech company often can kind of break through the distrust that they often have in what are you really doing with my data, and are you going to sell out my community?
Do you have a decent relationship? I mean, I see a lot of stuff that, for example, Google does that I would assume would be very consistent with the kinds of things you're doing. Do you work closely with any of these companies?
As a matter of fact, full disclosure, someone from Google is on my board, and I've gotten over the years a fair number of grants from Google, and they, and of course, probably one of my biggest funders is the two co-founders or early execs at eBay, Omid Yar and Skoll. So yeah, we have a lot of good relationships with tech companies. As a matter of fact, after Jeff and Pierre started, they gave pre-IPO stock to a foundation in late '99, right before the dot-com bubble, and no one had ever done that before. And now there's a group called Pledge 1%. It's modeled after this. You do a startup for-profit company, you pledge 1% of your stock, 1% of your profits, 1% of your product, and 1% of your employee time to social good. And those companies are terrific partners. And I think that I've actually found, talking to senior execs there, that they actually do believe that being a Pledge 1% company makes their corporate culture better, makes them more interesting for recruits. Because they're about something more than just making money. And a lot of them are tech companies that you know all about, but the average consumer has never heard of Box or Twilio or Okta or PagerDuty. But these are all companies that if you build tech products in the cloud, you're using them all the time.
Nobody, I think we have vaguely talked about AI, but not about the most recent generative AI technologies. We've got to dive into that.
Of course.
Because obviously everybody is trying to figure out how to squeeze generative AI into just about everything. Are you concerned that people are going to try to use that in ways that it's just they've got to try something that's got generative AI in it and try to find some excuse for using it without having a clear idea of what it's good for their nonprofit?
Well, we have the stats. I think MIT reported 95% of big Gen AI projects in business didn't pay off.
Yeah.
I've read other stats that in the social sector it's like 80 or 90%. I consider those good numbers. I mean, the number of blockchain projects that succeed in the nonprofit sector, that's, I don't know, 99.99% failure rate.
Maybe 2, I don't know.
I don't know yet. They're still working on it. And so I actually think that those kind of failure rates are not bad. The main thing I'm trying to do is get nonprofits not to do something that's stupid and or unethical. And I mean, one of the examples I have in the book is the National Eating Disorders Association in the U.S. Eating disorders went way up during the pandemic. Their team was really stressed. They were starting to talk about unionizing. And the board fired all of the human counselors that took calls from people with weight disorders and replaced them with Tessa, the AI chatbot for weight disorders. And 3 days later, some survivor was like testing this out to see how it was and got screenshots of Tessa telling you to count calories. Now, if you know anything about weight disorders, that's the last thing you should tell someone who has an eating disorder. But if you figure out what's the average of the internet's advice on weight disorders, it might well be count calories, right? And so NITA was so embarrassed they had to shut it down. And now people with eating disorders don't have a hotline with expert trained counselors, and they don't have an AI because the AI didn't work. So I'm telling people, don't fire your staff yet. It's not ready. I wrote last year. I wrote a piece called "Should I Be Using AI for This?" aimed at nonprofit executive directors, and it's a treasure map, and it's kind of shows find your own adventure. But it's basically wait till there's a product because it'll be cheap. It'll have some safety built in. There'll be training about it, and you can test it. And if it doesn't, if fixing the AI errors, because AI always makes mistakes, if that takes you less time than the time you saved by the productivity gains, sign me up. And so those are showing up in certain areas.
Well, give us an example of specific areas where nonprofits are using that.
Oh, well, I mean, if fundraising, right? If I have to squeeze a 500-word answer in a 250-word box, AI is quite good at that.
Writing fundraising letters and stuff like that?
Yeah, but my main advice in the treasure map is, unless you don't care about quality, have someone reviewing all the output from the AI. That you have to build that into your process. And since most nonprofits do care about their output, but you will save time. I mean, we have software developers, obviously, in our nonprofit, and they're, getting 10 or 20% productivity increase. There's a lot of things that it helps. And, paying $20 a month to get a 20% productivity increase for someone, and we don't pay top tech wages, but, pay $100,000 a year, that's a really good payoff. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. I'm a big fan of summarization. I think you and I have talked a little bit about summarization. AI has a hard time going crazy summarizing something, and it's very fast at summarization. So that's a great application. We're using it in our helpline product. Summarize an hour-long text chat that a kid and the counselors had. It writes better. It writes better summaries than the counselors do, and the counselors hate doing data entry. So,
well, yeah, but it's interesting to note that everything we're talking about right here, you do not need to build a special app to do it. You can just go out there. You could just go online and find these things right there.
We're building on top of the standard platforms,
right?
But we're adding those guardrails. So our average nonprofit couldn't use ChatGPT and have it be safe.
Give me an example of the kind of thing you're worried about.
Well, I mean, that's an example for one thing. We make sure that ChatGPT or a company like that doesn't have access to the confidential chat logs of the counselor and the kid in need. You should, that in some countries, in some states, that's illegal to share with a commercial company. But I see nonprofits all the time feeding in confidential client data into a commercial product that is going to take that data and train on it. And that's
some of them
bad.
Anyway. Some of them pledge not to, as I understand it.
There's very few of them that for their free product promise not.
Right. Well, I wasn't assuming we'd be talking about a free.
But remember, we're talking about nonprofits. Nonprofits are like, we don't have any money.
All right,
so we feed all this confidential data into a commercial product, which is being offered for free. And why are they offering it for free? Well, you're the product, right? So,
exactly.
So that's one thing. Is like you have to pay for it, and you have to, and not all the ones that you pay for will agree not to promise. Sometimes I point out, let's pick sensitive domestic violence data, right? ChatGPT, last I looked, if you pay them, will not train on your data, but they will hold your queries for 30 days. Well, that's 30 days that someone else has your sensitive data that they could be, the government could ask for it. Let's say the government wants to say, who using your service has disclosed that they're an illegal immigrant in government parlance? So, more and more organizations that serve people who are disfavored, and, it's not uncommon that the government is going after the data of your people, just it's less common in the US, but now it's a little bit more frequent. So you probably want to be very careful with sensitive data. But if you're summarizing, I don't know, environmental law, I wouldn't worry about them training on your data. And I don't worry about them copying our grant applications because, frankly, if they make people write better grant applications by training on some of ours, great. But I think the thing that the nonprofit sector really has to worry about is less about the data of their nonprofit and more about the data of the people they serve and not ratting them out.
Yeah, but then that means there is a sort of a divide between the nonprofits that have lots of private sensitive information and versus nonprofits that don't, I presume, like, I don't know, a food bank or somebody like that who really doesn't.
A food bank that has someone doing a clicker counting how many meals they've served doesn't have a data management problem that is super sensitive.
Exactly.
But someone who's helping homeless people and collecting a lot of data on homeless people and about their mental health issues, that's a different matter. Even if they're not covered by our medical privacy law, there should be a very high barrier to how they use that data.
Okay. I know I asked you this before specifically, but I want to make sure. Is there a step-by-step thing you use? Well, I think you actually did talk about it specifically with AI, about how do you decide when you should build an app as opposed to just using stuff that's off the shelf that is already out there?
So, there's sort of the thing for the average nonprofit, which is wait till there's a product, don't build an app. And in the book, I actually talk about the bad ideas that everybody tries first, right? The app that no one will download, the giant database in the sky, blockchain or metaverse or whatever the latest fad is. There's just certain things that the tech industry has learned what makes money and what doesn't make money, I'm going to say, in apps. And yet, in the nonprofit sector, everyone still thinks that you need an app. And I just have to walk people through Most people don't have an app use case, you know, and part of the book is saying, I want to hold up the 5% of the time that an app makes sense, and what made it make sense, and what made the 95% fail not. So if you're thinking about doing an app, you should read, you know, that part of chapter 2.
How do you find people who know what they're doing? That's another critical problem. If you're going to have a nonprofit and you're going to be building or even just manage, even if you don't build it, you're going to need people who can manage the technology. And they could all get jobs making real money. So what are you going to do?
So two things come to mind. One thing is I'm an advisor to a group called Board.dev, which is trying to get nonprofit executives and leaders on the boards of nonprofits, so that having a board member who knows something about data privacy is going to make a big step up on how you're handling data and the thing. The other thing is that you know, I tell people, wait for products, talk to your peers. That, you know, if you're a member of an association, the association is going to be able to collate, you know, common needs. That's how we often end up with projects. Is an association comes to us and says, we have 150 members around the world. They all have the same problem. Why don't you talk to them and build a product for them? That's our helpline product, was exactly that path. But if you're actually going to build your own product, my number one advice is don't outsource it 100%. Consultants will charge you whatever money you have and another 50%, and you will end up with a product that you're not very happy with. But if you have one person on your team who knows what they're doing from a technology standpoint, doesn't have to be a software developer, could be a product person, could be someone who's been in tech business, but someone who knows when they're being taken for a ride by a consultant, or could actually say, I know you think that this is going to work, but let's go further up and actually test it with our community. I think you need someone technical on your side. And obviously, board members are free, and we don't see a difficulty hiring tech people who will work for less. I don't have to change the average tech person in the world. I only have to change 0.0001% of tech people. And so we have a compressed wage scale in our nonprofit. I think it's very common where if you're coming out of tech and you're getting $500,000 a year, you're probably not going to be making much more than $150,000 at our nonprofit, and there aren't very many jobs like that, right? But someone who's fresh out of school is probably going to be making 70 to 90, which in the nonprofit sector is really good, but in, you know, and it's kind of okay for regular tech, but the gulf, but you're not taking a 50% or a 80% pay cut to work in the nonprofit sector if you're more at the entry level.
No, you've seen these reports that people with computer science degrees are finding it hard to find jobs. Maybe you can just
come to the nonprofit sector. We need you.
No, I mean, this occurred to me simply because, you know, at our church, we went and hired some company to build our website instead of doing it. We used to do it ourselves on WordPress. And the problem is that now we need to alter it, and nobody in the church has any idea how to get in and change the software. Yep. And that's just one tiny little church. And there have got to be thousands of churches and other organizations and in the same boat.
That have the same
and
issue.
They need somebody on staff. We can't afford to hire an IT guy.
Well, so something you may not know is that the former CEO of Intel, Pat Gelsinger, is the chair of Glue, which is a company that's making software just for churches. They're about managing your activities and managing your website, and all putting it within the hands of the average, basically, church staff member. Now, I don't know what it's priced like, so if you check it out, let me know if you would recommend it.
Thank you very much for that tip. We very badly need it right now.
GLOO.
GLOO. I've heard of it, but I didn't realize that's what they did.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it out. We have got 15 minutes left. We got to start taking questions, don't we?
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so Susan's been checking the people in Zoom land, plus we have people in person here.
Yeah. Can the people at Zoom land hear Park Street Church? It's lovely. The bells?
Yes. Are there any, okay, good. So I'm going to ask you to speak into the mic so we can pick it up for recording purposes.
Thank you. This is fascinating. Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you work at a nonprofit, by the way?
I work for myself, and I advise donors and nonprofits. So I help people give money away, and I help nonprofits figure out not their tech issues, but strategic planning, board development, and fundraising.
Great.
So I need to take a minute just to pick myself up off of the floor listening to someone with your skill set, Silicon Valley tech background, who's actually trying to do something good.
There's more of us every day.
So I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to see your example. And my question is really about, in my mind anyway, what you're doing in your world is countercultural. And anytime you swim upstream, there can be pushback, there can be friction. So I wonder if any of the cool kids in the tech world have somehow expressed an offense to what you're trying to do, because I think your example makes it even clearer what so many other companies are doing with technology, poisoning the well and so on. So I wonder if you've had any friction in your world about it.
So no, I haven't gotten a lot of friction because, relatively speaking, I'm a gnat. and so I think the average billionaire is not paying attention to what I'm doing, nor feels at all threatened by what I and hundreds of other Tech for Good nonprofits are doing. But I would make an observation that I think the tech industry, certainly when I started in it, was about solving problems. People were really excited about doing that. But what happens is that when you work with venture capitalists, right, you're told to relentlessly focus on making money, and sometimes externalizing some of the costs of negative things that happen with your products is just part of making a lot of money. And the average tech company is creating something of value. That's why they exist. And the kind of problems that we run into are at the fringes. But when you serve 1 billion people and your product is 0.1% bad, that's a lot of people who are suffering. And they will just go, yeah, I don't think we'll work on that. One thing I would say in the defense of the average tech leader is when I ask them to give me a free copy of their intellectual property for social good use, they say yes 80% of the time. And people are like, those greedy so-and-sos, why would they do that? And I'm like, no, they're quite proud of what they've created. They would love to see their technology help the kids of Zambia or survivors of sexual assault or whatever the issue that you're working on, but it doesn't pencil out. And as long as you promise that you won't gray market their technology back into their actual markets, they're actually very happy. And the only thing they ask me to do is to come back and tell their teams how we're using their technology to help people with disabilities or advance, climate change action in Africa or whatever it might be. So I think that a lot of people in the tech industry would like to do good, would like to see these things happen, and we have a few people who are a little, let's just put them out there on the spectrum of not caring about their average fellow person quite as much as the average person would. But I think that there's an awful lot of people in tech who would rather be doing something good. And I'm just trying to keep convincing them that, that we as a society should continue putting pressure on the tech companies when their products have negative impacts on society. And they certainly make a lot of money, which is great, because it funds an environment, but we should be able to regulate them for the worst excesses of what they do, whether that's environmental pollution or and not protecting kids. Meta working on sex bots that are going to talk to children. That was jaw-dropping, right? Who thought that was a good idea? There had to have been some parents on that team, but maybe they just held their nose. I don't know.
Well, I feel the same way about, the OpenAI saying we're going to start offering, I guess, what he called very prudently, erotica on computer-generated erotica and the possibilities.
Wait a minute, I thought they were going to save the world. Wait a minute.
Well, yeah, and it's a deeply disturbing prospect. But, it drives me crazy because I am not, I don't object to billionaires as some people do, because I think these people have generated such benefits for the world that it makes perfect sense that they got rich doing it. But it seems at times that they lose track of the fact that there are consequences to what they do, and they don't fully think them through. So I get that. But we need to take more questions here.
Oh,
wow.
I
Okay,
love
yeah,
it.
lots of questions.
I saw your hand
And
first.
I was going to say,
I'm not sure which came up first.
I'm a big recipient of money from billionaires who've chosen to take the giving pledge. So I'll put a plug in for the giving pledge. But please, your question.
All right, so I can certainly see with disabilities, very distinct kinds of things you could do. I'm having difficulty trying to generalize for other kinds of nonprofit kinds of operations. So for example, I have had a student who was blind and actually graduated from the law school using the kind of technology developed and is now has an offer, is going to start working for, one of the top law firms in Boston.
Yeah.
So it's, fantastic what you're doing. But let's take like another area that I'm interested in, which is sustainability and land grants or trusts to preserve property.
Yeah.
So if you have a land trust organization and you want to, let's see, get donors or find donors or owners of property to donate their land to create a trust for property that's going to be used now for conservation purposes. And we're probably talking about rural areas or areas where it could be urban, and actually if they're used for recreational purposes or helping with respect to creating open space, which can then help the water supply or clean the water supply.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out what kind of technology.
Oh, I've got so many examples for you.
Okay, because it strikes me this is the same, they would be doing the same thing the private sector is doing.
No, they're based on the same tech stack, but the last 1 or 2% is distinctly different in the nonprofit sector. So for example, let's talk about land use.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And the land trust thing. So I happen to know that there's a California-based nonprofit that has taken AI and analyzed all the land use in California and identified parcels that have the biggest contribution to the health of rivers and streams. They're oriented towards that's their conservation issue. And so they use this to analyze the land use patterns and target which parcels they're going to try and get their hands on now. And of course, maybe they'll get someone to donate it, but that's an example of using AI. Well, I'll give you another example.
A great example.
We, more than 15 years ago, we got asked by the conservation movement to create project management software. And of course, they could use Microsoft Project, but then they would commit suicide. So Microsoft Project is a gigantic pain in the ass. Okay, it was a terrible piece of software, but it was the commercial product. And so we built something in partnership with a bunch of conservation organizations, including some of the big national ones like the Nature Conservancy, that was all about how you would manage your field conservation project, which might range from advocacy or actual field operations to get rid of invasive species or whatever it is. And that software, it's called Marathi. We got out of it like 10 years ago. You can't kill it. It's still there. People are still using it. So I'll give you a software package that we just released in the last year. Global soil identification. So if I'm out in the field and I don't have a lab, how do I know what this soil is good for? We walk you through a step-by-step process to figure out what that soil is. And if you know what that soil is, then you know what that land is capable of doing, and you might be able to, come up with a way to shore up that hillside or get more carbon into the soil by certain ag practices or whatever it might be. So I think you pick a different issue. The fact that nobody knows that these people are out there is part of the reason I wrote the book. I've talked about some of them in my book, but you scratch the surface, there are more nonprofits doing very cool things with tech, copying for-profit applications, like, I don't know, how to buy land for cheap and sell it for high, but anyway.
Well, yeah, but that's something, you should write a second book. I mean it
There we
literally,
go.
because you're looking at the book and I'm saying, boy, I wish he had more examples that are specific, because you could do a catalog of all the different such technologies that people don't know about. I'm perfectly serious. I'd never heard of some of those. You didn't mention the one, what was it, the environmentalist one, where they use photographs from Landsat that entered the public domain, and they have an app that lets people look at land use use patterns, destruction of rainforests, all that kind of stuff. And it's used around the world now.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of Brazilian land use scientists who worked with Google.
Right.
And Google gives them all the free storage and compute that they can use. And they analyze the Landsat images, which the US government made for free. And they could show you basically a movie of how the land of a specific plot of land evolved in Brazil. And it was so cool for Brazil, it's now in, I don't know, 25 countries and open source software. But I know we need to probably move to another question.
right.
So thank you very much. But there's so much more to be talked about in this area. So, yeah.
Thank you. What would be your advice for a for-profit tech worker who wants to help? Maybe they're not building a full application, but they have some extra time on the weekends and some coding skills. Where would you get started?
Well, I would actually, find a cause that you care about and serve on a board so that you actually get to know more of the challenges that the community that nonprofit serves actually face, if you want to actually get more engaged. There are open source projects, but one of the challenges is, even though we're open source, the traditional open source model is you have a bunch of developers that want to help develop that software because they're going to find it useful. Unfortunately, our community are poor people and nonprofits, and they don't have a lot of technologists. So we have to find a way to kind of shoehorn people into this. There are, and obviously the open source movement is always open to people who want to, get involved in open source. But open source for good is kind of this edge case that doesn't get as many developers. And one of the things that we do is we kind of use two kinds of volunteers. One is, whenever we have let's say we have a security challenge because we're developing software for human rights activists, we can get in and talk to the top people who do cybersecurity, and they'll give us advice because we're working on a really cool application of cybersecurity, and we don't have money, and they can make $600 an hour consulting for somebody else and give us some pro bono time. So we look for experts, and then often we do UX prototyping is another way that, like we do hackathons, where give us 5 different ways we might show this, and then we show that to our users.
So Jim, we have 2 Zoom questions,
Okay, great.
but I am going to take this gentleman's question, and this gentleman's been raising his hand for a while.
Okay.
So we're going to get to these
And I
questions.
should tighten my answers. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, I'm not asking you to do that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating talk. Could you speak to a little bit to whether you see if there's scope for public-private partnerships to come together to tackle some of these issues? Perhaps in the example of the land grant, you said maybe there's a geology company that might be developing something similar but wouldn't be competitive. I run a children's educational media company. We produce content, characters, but we have several partnerships with nonprofits. We're a for-profit company,
Yeah.
but we gauge ourselves on impact.
Yeah.
For-profit, nonprofit is nothing. We had 2 different MacArthur Fellow partnerships, funnily enough. But I remember,
Well,
your thoughts about public-private
there's a
partnerships.
lot in there, but we get so much help from the tech industry, and again, they're really happy to help us. And these Pledge 1% companies all have programs. Google, which is not a Pledge 1% company, they got started before that, but they're very generous with their ad grants or their software. So there's a lot of this. The public part, I mean, the end game for almost all nonprofits, especially innovative nonprofits, was you work your way up through philanthropy and then you graduate to government funding. And we had a public-private partnership with our U.S. Department of Agriculture to build that soil identification app. They were the original funder of that, and they're not funding us anymore. So maybe that it's this interesting advice. A lot more of the nonprofits I know are pivoting to revenue models, which get closer to the for-profit world. And the last thing I'll say is that after where do I find the money to do this, should I be a for-profit or nonprofit is the second most popular question I get from people. And I wrote a piece on this called For Love or Lucre. It's on the internet. And it's basically whatever works best is the form you should take. If you can make money and do social good, you should probably be a for-profit. It's a lot easier. I've done both. But I think that if you're in this area where it doesn't make enough money, then you start looking at either hybrid models, where there's a for-profit that gives stuff to the nonprofit, or a nonprofit that has a revenue model, or in the case of software for human rights activists, we're always going to give it away, because if we charge for it, we would just completely undercut our goals. And we had another question?
Let me get to the Zoom.
Zoom?
So
A Zoom one? Okay.
a question came in very, very early on, Jim. What about developing an app as you gain experience and then marketing it later?
Well, I think that most apps are not a great idea, right? I mean, an app because you're operating in the back of beyond and there's no internet and you need something that will work when there is no internet, that's an app use case. Something educational that you're going to be using daily or weekly, that's an app use case. But an awful lot of things that nonprofits do would probably be better off as an active web page or something like that. And so building it first and then maybe later marketing it, I think if you've got product market fit, in other words, if you've actually solved a problem for people that actually does it, then looking for a revenue, maybe I misunderstood the question, but then looking for a revenue model is really important. Our general goal when we start something new, and I've started a lot of things, is that any of our new projects, unless it's in human rights, is going to figure out a way to get half of its budget from revenue. So, and what that means is US and European nonprofits have budgets. We're cheaper than Salesforce or whatever. And developing world nonprofits still may pay us something, but often less than it costs us to deliver the service. So.
Was there, what?
Oh, we have another question.
Thank you. It was such an inspiring talk. The book was great. I'm a grad student trying to work a lot with the nonprofit in the area, in Cambridge and Boston area. Yeah. You told us a lot about like really interesting cutting edge technology cases. But when I was working with a lot of local nonprofits, there's a lot of value that's just waiting there when we just adopt like very basic solution like Airtable, Zapier. But then the thing is, a lot of the smaller micro nonprofits where there's only one executive director with one part-time employee, they are very resource constrained to even think about or like let alone adopt this technology. So could you tell us more about your experience? How can this kind of micro nonprofit adopt like very ready-made off-the-shelf solution like that they can just adopt and add tremendous value?
Yeah, I think you're accurate in that I'm describing more advanced technology solutions where you're actually going to have a tech team building a product, whether that's for your internal use or for the use of other nonprofits. I think that the average community-based organization looks a lot like the average small business person, right? And so what do small nonprofits use? They use QuickBooks. Right, same as a small business person would. Now, is QuickBooks ideal for a nonprofit? No, but it's so cheap and it's so widely used and everyone knows how to use it that adding a little spreadsheet at the end to do the magic of a little bit of nonprofit accounting is definitely worth it. So I tell people just to say most community-based organizations are going to have something that looks a lot like what a small business person that's running, a two-person little company in the community. Those are pretty well served by off-the-shelf products.
Yeah, but the thing you said earlier about how there are undoubtedly people who have developed these things, more affluent nonprofits may have developed tools that some of these smaller nonprofits could use if they even knew they existed.
Yeah, and this, an example, one of a nonprofit that focused on healthcare in Africa built an open source logistics tool for managing the supply chain. And all the other nonprofits and government agencies in the area said, we want it. And they spun it out as an independent tech project because they had built it for their own needs. But the fact that they built it and could justify it meant that then a much smaller organization could take the benefit of this.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
You find a bigger company or organization that's already done it, and you use theirs. You don't develop it yourself.
Yeah, but I think the thing is that and I call them verticals, even though that's not the term that's used in the nonprofit sector. But if you're in mental health, there's going to be case management software that's available to you if you're in the U.S. If you're in the developing world, there's an open source project from that UNICEF sponsors that's designed for government agencies, and there's nothing below it. So there's not always something there. But I think the benefit of being in the U.S. is the average individual is probably going to get access to some pretty good productivity tools, even if they're never going to use Zapier themselves. Do we have another question from Zoomland?
It's actually a question about the tax code.
Oh, I'm a nerd. I'll try anything. I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on Zoom.
Do you want to go for it?
Absolutely. Well, tell me what the tax code question is after I've now said I am not a lawyer. But yes,
Okay. So this question
you
is,
should use your mic.
what point in the future, especially with this current administration, or a similar one, if a similar one remains in power, will we see where the IRS tax code changes and doesn't allow the donations we are making to the nonprofits that lost funding to be deductions on our yearly taxes?
So that's not really a question about the tax code as it stands today. It's a concern about what might happen in the future. And the nonprofit sector has been running scared for the most of this year about things that could happen. Obviously, they've lost a lot of funding internationally, tremendously, and domestically, a lot of funding has been withheld, and a lot of funding is being withheld from state and local governments, which then rattles on to the nonprofits that would actually use those things. So, we like to think that tax code changes actually require Congress to do something.
I remember Congress.
Congress, yeah.
Yes.
And nonprofits, especially community-based nonprofits, are pretty popular with elected representatives on both sides of the aisle. And so I think that something that, said that you couldn't fund projects that help women who are survivors of domestic violence, which, one can imagine that it's disfavored by certain people and I think it would be very hard to actually remove that. And of course, we have an organized nonprofit sector that's pretty sophisticated. They've been working on Republicans and Democrats, and especially in the Senate, but just to kind of firewall anything that just really backs away from this. The thing that is worrying the international development world the most is disallowing donations to organizations outside the U.S. That's the one that seems more conceivable. I would have a harder time imagining them stopping community-based activities that the communities appreciate.
Especially since so many of them are church-related. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. And we've already gotten some pushback from, yes, some parts of the, anyway. So how are we doing, Susan?
Well, are there any other questions?
I think, did we see one more, or we're good? Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
here we go.
okay, so
All right.
so we're going to call this our final question?
Our final question.
The final word.
okay.
Well, I'm going to give Jim and Hiawatha the final word.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have anything to say.
Thanks so much. I loved the comment at the beginning talking about Libby as an example of a social sector innovation becoming a more mainstream tool. And so I'm wondering, with AI and the leapfrogging that can happen with low code and no code tools, are there places that you're looking into your crystal ball or predicting might be an area that the social sector will lead in innovation?
So right now, the off-the-shelf chatbots are not really good for counseling, and yet because so many people don't get mental health counseling,
You don't want to commit suicide?
and I think people know why, right? I mean, these they're tuned to be sycophantic,
Yeah.
even though they've turned it down a little bit. But hey, I want to jump off the building. Oh, that would be wrong. For research purposes, I might want to jump off a building. Oh, well, then you should go at least 6 stories high, to make sure that the chatbots are not very smart. They actually don't know what they're saying, right? You can trick them without a lot of effort. But I do believe that we're going to be seeing applications with guardrails that do interesting things in mental health counseling. I've already seen a couple of chatbots that started in the pre-LLM days, there's Violeta in Mexico that's trying to help women just deal with the social norms that make violence against women more normalized, and trying to actually take that back. I think that's a good example, and they're being very careful and doing it in a very smart way. So I think that in 5 years, we're probably going to deal with the fact that we don't have enough mental health professionals in the world, not to mention the United States, that we'll have things that where we can reserve our limited number of mental health professionals for the people in greatest need, and people who are in more mild need will actually get something that's actually good. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about people with disabilities that affect executive function, people who are just chronically disorganized. Sometimes that's just the way their brain works. I already know people with disabilities, with those kind of disabilities, who say, I actually get ChatGPT to organize my life. And it's the things I say I want to do, and it helps me actually get to them. And it's like having an assistant that is reminding me of the things I want to do. So I can imagine a lot of cool things.
I got to throw, because you brought in mental health,
Yeah.
and I just thought of this myself. I'm not prepared to trust these things at all in one absolutely critical area. And it's not so much the fault of the technology as the fault of the culture. We are seeing more and more places in the world that are legalizing euthanasia.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when you ask a chatbot, should I kill myself, in a society that tells people, yes, under some circumstances, you should kill yourself?
Yeah.
That's something people haven't thought about very much, have they? No. When the chatbot says, oh, go ahead, take that poison, it might be giving what, according to some experts, would be the best possible medical advice. I think that's a very dangerous thing, and I think it's going to happen. And I don't know.
I'm not. I would not be surprised, because those views are out there on the internet.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's legal in many places, so what are you going to do?
Yeah. Okay, so.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So we have been graced by these nationally recognized thought leaders. Oh, stop, Hiawatha, just
Oh,
stop.
yeah, I walk down the street, people recognize me, yeah, sure.
Happens all the time.
Absolutely.
You are too modest, but in all seriousness, so you are known certainly in the region and nationally, Hiawatha. And Jim, your work is so impressive and so important and so extraordinary, and I thank you so much for coming to Boston, for gracing Fort Hall Forum, the nation's oldest continuously operating free public lecture series. And this is Hiawatha's second time here at Fort Hall Forum, so I thank you both for gracing us with your wisdom, your generosity of spirit, your humor. So thank you so much. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to our very mighty Zoom audience for being here. Have a good evening.